There is a moment, one single moment, when a man's entire worldview gets torn apart and laid flat on the marble floor for everyone to see. Not in a courtroom, not in a boardroom, but in the lobby of a $400,000 wedding in Greenwich, Connecticut, when the truth a man spent a lifetime running from comes walking right back through the front door he just slammed it out of. This is the story of Marcus Bennett, a man who woke up before 5 in the morning, pressed his one good suit by hand, rode a yellow cab to his daughter's wedding, and got called a filthy beggar to his face in front of 300 guests. And this is the story of what happened next in the 6 hours that followed when the world made absolutely certain that man got the very last word. Before we continue, comment what time you're watching and where in the world you're from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you simply cannot miss. Marcus Bennett woke up at 4:58 in the morning on the day his daughter was getting married. Not because an alarm went off. He had not needed an alarm clock in 30 years. His body simply knew. He lay quiet in the darkness of his apartment on Calumet Avenue in Chicago for exactly 2 minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of the city he loved. A bus rumbling past on the street below, a dog barking 3 floors down, the faint metallic hiss of a radiator that had been threatening to quit since February and somehow never did. It was the same apartment he had lived in for the last 12 years. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and old wood, a window that looked out over a neighborhood most people in his professional world would never set foot in by choice. He liked it that way. He had always liked it that way. He got up, padded to the kitchen in his undershirt and slacks, and started the coffee. While it brewed, he set up the ironing board in the living room and pressed his navy suit. He had pressed it the night before. He pressed it again anyway. Slow, deliberate strokes, corner to corner, crease to crease, like a man ironing a uniform for something that required getting it exactly right. Because it did. The suit was 12 years old. It still fit fine. He had bought it for a board meeting in the spring of 2011 and had worn it to every significant occasion in his life since that day. Funerals, church, his daughter Nia's college graduation down in Atlanta. The day he signed the papers, that changed everything. Today, on the kitchen table, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a length of kitchen twine, sat 2 things. A gold pocket watch, the kind with real weight to it, scratched on the back, from 30 years of being passed between hands and dropped in pockets and held by people who needed to hold something solid. It had belonged to Marcus's father, who had worked the line at a Ford plant in Detroit for 31 years and never once called in sick, unless he was in the hospital. And beside it, a letter, handwritten on plain lined paper pulled from a legal pad, for pages front and back, written in Marcus's careful block letters. No stationery, no monogram, no embossed seal. Just the words a father had been trying to find for 29 years, finally written down in the right order on the 3rd try. He stood at the bathroom mirror and adjusted his collar and looked at himself for a long moment. Not with vanity, with the quiet assessment of a man checking his inventory before a long drive. He tugged the lapel straight and said quietly to his own reflection, "She is not marrying the suit. She is marrying the man her father raised her to look for." He believed that. He had believed it for 29 years, from the moment Nia came into the world at Cook County Hospital on the south side of Chicago and permanently rearranged what the word purpose meant to him. On his desk near the window, half buried under a stack of business journals and legal documents he kept meaning to file, sat a leather portfolio. Dark brown, worn smooth at the corners from years of being carried into rooms, embossed with 3 capital letters. He glanced at it. He did not pick it up. Not today. Today he was not a founder. Today he was not a chairman. Today he was not a majority shareholder or a board member or any of the other things that 3-inch binders in a federal archive said he was. Today he was just a father going to watch his daughter get married. Now here is what you need to understand about Marcus Bennett before we go any further, because who a man is and who people think he is are not always the same thing. And in this story, that gap is everything. To the people in his neighborhood on the south side, Marcus was the quiet man on the 3rd floor who tipped generously at the diner on 43rd Street and helped Mrs. Patterson with her groceries on Thursday afternoons and had a word of encouragement for every kid he saw leaving for school in the morning. To Nia, he was the man who showed up at every school play and every parent-teacher conference and every college visit, who taught her to drive in a church parking lot on a Sunday, who cried at her graduation and turned his face away so she would not see it, who wrote letters to her every month while she was in graduate school because he believed that a handwritten letter meant something a text message did not. To the rest of the world, including the man his daughter was about to marry, Marcus Bennett was simply Nia's dad, a man who did some consulting work and lived somewhere in Chicago in a neighborhood that polite company at fancy venues did not discuss. But here is the truth about Marcus Bennett. 29 years ago, he started a logistics company out of a rented warehouse on the south side of Chicago, with one truck, 2 contracts, and a stubbornness that his mother used to call his best and worst quality, depending on the day. He drove the routes himself for the first 3 years. He slept in the cab of that truck more nights than he could count. He ate gas station sandwiches and drank cold coffee from paper cups and ran the numbers on a legal pad at rest stops because he could not afford an accountant yet. He pushed that company through 2 recessions and a market crash and a period of 6 months where he genuinely did not know if they would survive the quarter. They survived. Then they grew. Then they expanded into adjacent markets. Then they acquired 2 smaller firms. Then they merged with a mid-sized holding company out of Philadelphia, and the resulting entity became Apex Atlantic Holdings, an infrastructure and investment conglomerate with offices in 8 cities, contracts on 4 continents, and a portfolio that analysts in New York valued at north of $4 billion. Marcus Bennett was the founder, the majority shareholder, and the chairman of the board. He had been all 3 for 22 consecutive years. 10 years ago, quietly and without ceremony, Marcus stepped back from the day-to-day operations. No press conference, no farewell tour, no profile in a business magazine. He installed his most trusted partner and friend, a man named Raymond Cole, as chief financial officer, handed the operational authority to a board of directors he had personally assembled, and moved back to Chicago. Came back to the apartment on Calumet. Came back to the diner on 43rd Street. Came back to the neighborhood where he started. He did it because he had watched too many men spend their lives building fortunes and wake up one morning to discover they had lost their children somewhere in the process, and he was not going to be one of those men. He wanted Nia to be loved for exactly who she was, not for the magnitude of what her last name was quietly worth. He wanted her to build a life that was genuinely hers, not one shaped entirely by the gravity of a billion-dollar trust fund. The ownership of Apex Atlantic was structured through the Bennett Family Trust, a legal entity buried in holding agreements and filings that no mid-level executive at the company would ever think to pull up and examine. The founder's name was not on the company website. It was not in the executive bio section. It was in a document in a federal archive and in Raymond Cole's memory, and exactly nowhere else that a vice president of operations named Preston Whitfield would ever encounter it. Preston Whitfield was 34 years old, 6 feet 1 inch, square jaw, the particular kind of year-round tan you get from a summer place on the Connecticut shore and not from working outdoors. He had grown up in Greenwich, the same town where he was now hosting his wedding, in a house with 6 bedrooms and a driveway long enough to park 4 cars in a row. His father, Gerald, was a retired investment banker who lunched at the same table at the same Midtown Manhattan restaurant every Friday for 30 years. His mother, Margaret, had never worked outside the home and considered that a mark of distinction. Preston went to prep school in Connecticut, then to Duke on a partial legacy admission, then directly into financial services on a wave of family connections and the specific social gravity that comes from being the right kind of person in the right kind of rooms. He had been at Apex Atlantic Holdings for 3 years and had climbed to vice president of operations faster than almost anyone in the infrastructure division in recent memory. He believed, without irony or self-examination, that he had earned every dollar and every title through his own excellence. He had never thought to ask, not once in 3 years, who had actually founded the company he worked for. It was not relevant to him. It was not his problem. The company was a brand, a salary, a stock option package, a line on a resume. That was all it needed to be. He had met Nia Bennett at a charity gala in Manhattan 22 months earlier. He had found her beautiful and sharp and impressive in the way of a woman who had genuinely built something, with her intelligence, and her own work, a master's degree from Georgetown and a real career in education nonprofit consulting, running literacy programs for underserved public schools across the Northeast. He asked her to dinner. She said yes. For months later, they were exclusive. 8 months after that, he proposed over dinner at a Tribeca restaurant that required a 3-month reservation with a 3-carat diamond that his mother had helped him select. But there were things about Nia that Preston had been quietly, persistently reshaping over the course of their relationship in ways so smooth and reasonable sounding that they barely felt like reshaping at all. He had told her early on to keep the guest list from your side manageable. He had told her that her father did not need to give a speech at the reception. He had told her that this day was about our future, not your past. He had suggested, gently but more than once, that she not wear her hair natural for the ceremony, because it reads a certain way in photos that we will have forever. When she had invited her closest girlfriends to the bridal suite, he had mentioned that some of the venue staff have reported that larger groups in the suites create logistical challenges. Nia had pushed back on some of it. She had let other parts go because she loved him, or because she thought she did, or because she had convinced herself that the parts she did not like were just the friction of two people from different worlds learning to share one. She had not told Preston the full truth about her father, partly because Marcus had asked her not to, and partly because she had wanted to see, with her own eyes and in real circumstances, what kind of man Preston Whitfield actually was when he thought no one important was watching. The answer arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late June in Greenwich, Connecticut, and it cost more than anyone standing in that venue was prepared to pay. The Claiborne estate in Greenwich was not merely a wedding venue. It was a performance of wealth delivered in stone and ivy and crystal. A private drive lined with elm trees that had been there since the Civil War. Valets in pressed white shirts parking Porsches and Range Rovers, and one Bentley Continental that belonged to a hedge fund manager Preston had personally invited because he wanted other guests to see it parked there. The main building was a converted colonial manor, with arched windows, hand-painted ceilings, and floors of Italian marble, so polished you could read your own expression in them. Inside, the smell of white roses and old money was so thick it was almost physical. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. A champagne tower near the entrance that required its own insurance rider. Silverware at each place setting that cost more than Marcus Bennett's monthly rent. Every detail curated, measured, controlled, and arranged to project the one thing Preston Whitfield most needed people to feel in his presence, which was power. The wedding planner was a woman named Courtney Hale, 43 years old, silver-haired, clipboard in hand, who had planned events for 2 sitting senators, one Fortune 500 CEO, and one minor European royal. She ran the Claiborne estate operation with the precision of a field commander, every napkin folded at the identical angle, every candle trimmed to the same height, every flower arrangement measured down to the inch. 300 guests. Nearly every face in that building was white. Nia's side was smaller, positioned toward the back, a gathering of aunts and cousins and close friends seated politely in rows near the rear of the hall, far from the head table, far from the Halstead Group partners that Preston had placed in the second row. Nobody questioned the seating arrangement. It had been designed for flow. Upstairs in the bridal suite, Nia Bennett sat in front of a floor-length mirror in a dress of ivory silk, with a cathedral train that pulled behind her like something spilled from another world. Her hair was pinned back, with pearl clips, baby's breath woven through in careful loops, a look she had chosen herself, over 3 rounds of suggestions. Her maid of honor and closest friend, Danielle Brooks, was adjusting the veil when Danielle's phone buzzed on the vanity table. Danielle looked at it. Her hands went still. She read the message once, then read it again, and then she looked up at Nia. Your dad just got thrown out. Marcus Bennett's yellow cab had pulled into the Claiborne estate at 4:15 in the afternoon. Not a town car. Not a hired sedan with a driver in a cap. A yellow cab from the Stamford Taxi Company, because Marcus had stayed the previous night at a modest hotel in Stamford to avoid the long commute from Chicago the morning of the wedding. The valet at the end of the driveway did not know how to process the cab. He stood at the end of the long elm-lined drive and stared at it the way people stare at something, that does not match the pattern they were prepared for. Marcus stepped out. Navy suit. Brown paper package tied with twine. He tipped the driver $10 and thanked him by name and turned toward the entrance. He walked. The first people who saw him were a couple near the entrance, the wife in floor-length silk, the husband in a tailored tuxedo. The wife nudged her husband's arm without speaking. He looked at Marcus, looked away, looked back. That particular kind of double take that people perform when something disrupts the visual grammar of a room, when a face or a suit or a mode of arrival signals something they did not expect to process. Marcus kept walking. He had been receiving that specific look his entire adult life. He had learned a long time ago that the correct response was to keep walking. He pushed through the heavy oak front door and stepped into the lobby. Crystal chandeliers. White roses on every surface. The string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. 300 people in the finest clothes they owned, moving in slow clusters, clinking glasses, nodding and smiling in the practiced way of people who meet each other at these events every season and have learned to perform ease like a second language. The marble floor reflected everything upward, doubling the light, doubling the flowers, doubling the champagne glasses in everyone's hands. Marcus got 3 steps inside before Preston Whitfield saw him. Preston had been standing near the champagne tower, shaking hands with Gerald Halstead of Halstead Group, running the boardroom smile at full power, the one he had practiced in mirrors before quarterly reviews, because he understood intuitively that the quality of a smile was a business asset. Then he turned, and he saw Marcus Bennett standing 3 feet inside his lobby door, and that smile did not fade. It vanished. Completely. Immediately. Like something unplugged. He crossed the lobby in 10 strides. Long, hard, purposeful strides, jaw locked, eyes fixed. There was something in his face in that moment that was not simply anger, something older and uglier than anger, something that had been living beneath the surface of his charm for a very long time, without ever having been given a name or asked to justify itself. He stopped 2 feet from Marcus, and he said it loud enough for the string quartet to hear every word. Who the hell let this man in here? This is a private event. The lobby went silent. Not gradually. Instantly. The way a room goes silent when something happens that is too wrong to pretend is not happening. Marcus stood composed, the brown paper gift pressed against his chest with both hands. His voice, when he spoke, was level and quiet. I am Nia's father. Preston looked at him. Up and then down and then up again. He examined the suit, the shoes worn to a polish that was sincere, if not expensive, the brown paper package tied with kitchen string. A laugh came out of him, short and ugly. Her father. He said it the way a person says something they do not quite believe is true. Her father. He shook his head slowly. You know, I always wondered where she picked up certain habits. Now I understand. A handful of guests near the bar made sounds that were something between a laugh and an intake of breath. Enough to fill the silence in the worst possible way. Marcus's jaw tightened. Just once. Just barely. I came to walk my daughter down the aisle. And that. Preston's voice had gotten louder and more deliberate, the voice of a man who is no longer embarrassed because he is now performing, who is demonstrating something to an audience and wants the audience to understand what it is watching. He reached out and flicked the lapel of Marcus's jacket with 2 fingers, the way you flick something off a counter that has no business being on the counter. You find that at a Goodwill? You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing this family. I am not having this. He stepped closer, close enough that his voice dropped below the level of the room, directed only at Marcus. And this was the moment when whatever coded language Preston had been using ran out entirely, and something rawer and truer came through the gap. You do not belong here. You have never belonged in this family. Not in this venue. Not in my life. And frankly, if my skin looked like yours, I would have had the decency to stay home. He stepped back and raised his voice to the room again. He looked at the 2 security guards stationed near the entrance, large men in black suits, and he pointed at Marcus with 2 fingers and said, Get him out of here right now. This is a private event, and this man was not cleared. The guards moved forward. The younger of the 2, a man in his mid-20s with watchful dark eyes, looked at Marcus's face for a full second before he moved. He saw something there that gave him pause. Not weakness. something that was the precise opposite of weakness. The particular grace of a man who has been treated this way before, in other rooms, in other decades, and who has survived it every time, without losing the part of himself that mattered most. "Sir," the young guard said softly, "maybe we should check the guest list first, just to be sure." "I did not ask you to check anything," Preston said, his voice cutting. "I told you to remove him. If you cannot do the job I hired you for, I will find someone who can." The older guard stepped forward and placed a careful hand on Marcus's shoulder, not rough, but firm, the apologetic firmness of a man following instructions he does not personally endorse. "I'm sorry, sir. I need to ask you to step outside." Marcus looked at the hand on his shoulder. He looked at Preston. He looked at the 300 faces arranged around the lobby and the ballroom entrance, faces behind champagne glasses and flower arrangements, and the comfortable invisibility of being on the right side of a scene like this. He did not resist. He did not raise his voice. He turned toward the door, and he walked. His footsteps on the Italian marble were the only sound in the room, every step landing clean and deliberate in the silence. The chandelier light caught the brown paper gift still pressed against his chest, tied with its simple kitchen twine, something worth carrying carefully, because it was. At the bar, Preston's best man Tyler Marsh, 3 drinks in, and feeling the looseness that certain men confuse for wit, called out as Marcus reached the door, "Somebody better tell him the bus stop is 2 miles south." The laughter that answered him was not large or proud. It was small and nervous and came from the people who were most uncomfortable with what they had just watched and expressed it the wrong way. Marcus pushed through the heavy oak doors, and they closed behind him, with the finality of a period at the end of a sentence. The string quartet started playing again within 30 seconds. Because the show was still going, and the show, Preston believed, was all that mattered. Upstairs, Danielle Brooks's voice had barely finished the sentence before Nia Bennett was on her feet, gripping the front of her cathedral train wedding dress with both fists. She did not ask Danielle to repeat it. She did not sit down and breathe. She walked out of the bridal suite and came down the main staircase like a weather system moving through a narrow corridor. Guests at the bottom of the stairs scattered. A champagne glass sloshed. Someone dropped in hors d'oeuvre plate. She found Preston near the head table, straightening his boutonniere with the satisfied air of a man who has just managed a minor administrative inconvenience and is pleased with the outcome. He turned when he heard her heels, and his face shifted into warmth and practiced charm. "Babe, you look incredible. You need to be upstairs. We start in 20 minutes. You threw out my father." Not a question, a declaration. The lobby went quiet for the second time in 15 minutes. Preston moved toward her and lowered his voice to the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, while not actually being prepared to be reasonable. "Babe, I need you to relax." He walked in here looking like he found that suit in a church donation bin. "The Halstead Group partners are here. My parents' entire social circle is here. I am protecting what we have built tonight. You will understand that later. He is my father, Preston. I understand that." His voice had taken on an edge now, thin and hard at the border. "And I am asking you to be realistic about optics. This is a $400,000 event, and the people in this room are the foundation of our future. Your father walked in looking like he took a wrong turn off the highway. I am not apologizing for making a decision that protects our image." Nia looked at him for a long moment. "You do not know who he is." "I know enough," said with the total confidence of a man who has never been wrong about his first impressions of people. He's a man who could not put together a decent outfit for his own daughter's most important day. That tells me everything I need to know. Nia shook her head slowly. "No, Preston. It tells me everything I needed to know about you." She turned and walked toward the front door before he could respond. Outside, the late afternoon sun was laying long golden bars across the stone courtyard of the Claiborne estate. Marcus Bennett sat on a bench at the edge of the elm tree line, the brown paper package resting on his lap, his hands folded over it. He was not crying. He was not shaking. He sat with the composure of a man who has been here before, in other rooms, wearing other occasions of humiliation, and who has learned that the only honest response is to remain exactly himself. Lorraine Bennett, Nia's mother, had come outside right behind the security guards and found him there. She sat beside him now, shaking with a fury she was barely keeping below the surface. "That man looked at you and made his decision before you said a single word," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. 30 years. Everything you built. Everything you gave that girl. And he treated you like you were nothing." Marcus looked at the elm trees. "The world has been treating men like me like we are nothing for a very long time, Lorraine. That's not new. What matters is what I do with it." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. The names that appeared as he scrolled would have been recognizable to anyone in a boardroom or a business school. Board members, CEOs, a former Secretary of Transportation, a federal judge. He passed all of them. He stopped at one name and pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Raymond," he said, "come to the venue. Bring the file. He showed me exactly what you said he would." A pause while Raymond responded, "No, I am not going to make a scene. But I think it is time he finds out what he actually threw out." He hung up and looked at the Claiborne estate, at the stone walls and the iron gates, and the long driveway full of automobiles that his company had made possible for the men who drove them. His face was the face of a man who has been holding a card for 30 years and has finally decided tonight is the right night to lay it down. Nia burst through the front doors 2 minutes later, cathedral train dragging across the gravel, and threw her arms around his neck from behind. Marcus held her, with both arms, one hand on the back of her head, and closed his eyes. They sat like that on the stone bench in the golden light, father and daughter, until Nia pulled back and looked at his face. "Dad, what did you just do?" Marcus smiled. It was the first full smile he had produced all day. "I gave him exactly what he asked for." At 6:05 in the evening, a black Lincoln Town car turned onto the Claiborne Estate's private drive. It moved slowly past the Porsches and Range Rovers, with the quiet confidence of a vehicle that does not require speed to establish authority, and parked at the far end of the lot. The engine went silent. Raymond Cole stepped out. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, 57 years old, and wearing a charcoal three-piece suit, with a pale blue pocket square, silver cufflinks that caught what was left of the evening light like small fires, and shoes that had been polished to the kind of finish that takes real care and real time. He moved with the economy of a man who has spent his entire career walking into rooms where people underestimated him and has learned to find it mildly amusing rather than exhausting. Under his arm, a leather portfolio embossed with 3 letters. In his right hand, a manila envelope thick enough to contain something consequential. He found Marcus and Nia on the bench, sat beside Marcus, without greeting or preamble, and opened the envelope. Inside was a document assembled with the precision that Raymond brought to everything he touched. Preston Whitfield's complete professional record at Apex Atlantic Holdings, sorted by category and significance. 3 performance reviews, 2 of them carrying needs improvement notations in areas the documentation described as team cohesion and inclusive leadership, corporate language, that in context meant something specific and documented. For formal internal complaints filed against Preston by employees of color over the previous 18 months. 2 from Black analysts. 1 from a Latino project manager who had transferred out of Preston's division after 6 months with a complaint that HR had logged and then quietly set aside. Each complaint described variations of the same pattern: being passed over for opportunities they had earned, being excluded from meetings where their input was directly relevant, being spoken about in ways their white colleagues never were, being made to feel, consistently and deliberately, that their presence in the division was conditional and their advancement was subject to criteria that shifted depending on who was being evaluated. One of those complaints had been filed by a junior analyst named Deshaun Williams. It was 43 pages long. It included dates, witnesses, recorded statements, and direct quotes, including one incident at a team dinner in Manhattan where Preston had gestured toward Deshaun and said to a colleague, loud enough for 3 people to hear, "That's our diversity checkbox right there. Board loves him. I just need him to stay out of the way on the Meridian account." Deshaun had been at Apex Atlantic for 2 years at that point. He had a degree from Howard University and a postgraduate certification in financial analysis from NYU. He had been passed over for promotion 3 times. The documented reason each time was not the right cultural fit for senior-level visibility. Then the emails. Preston had sent them to Tyler Marsh from his Apex Atlantic corporate email account, which was either the product of extraordinary arrogance or extraordinary carelessness or both. One email, dated 4 months before the wedding, with the subject line Managing Optics, outlined Preston's approach to keeping Nia's family at a comfortable distance from the professional sphere. A second email, sent the week after Nia told Preston her father was in consulting, included the line, "At least I'm not bringing someone from the South Side onto our radar. That's the last thing I need right now." Raymond had marked that line in yellow highlighter. And then the financial irregularities. 18 months of performance metrics in Preston's division that had been adjusted, padded, and in several instances substantially fabricated to support his quarterly bonus calculations. Not by small amounts, by enough that, when Apex Atlantic's forensic accounting team reviewed the figures, the word they used was systemic. The kind of word that leads to other words, like federal. Marcus read every page without expression. When he finished, he closed the folder and handed it back to Raymond. He looked at the Claiborne estate for a long moment. "Let him put the ring on the altar first," he said. "I want him to understand the full distance between where he is and where he thought he was." Raymond nodded once. Two men who knew how to wait. At 6:20, the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The guests had moved from the lobby into the ballroom, 300 people arranged in white flower-lined rows, petals scattered down the central aisle, the string quartet now playing something slow and romantic. The Claiborne Ballroom was the most expensive room most of those guests had ever sat in, and they knew it, and the knowledge produced in them a particular kind of restless satisfaction. Preston stood at the altar, adjusting his boutonniere for the 5th time, checking his watch, scanning the back of the room. Tyler stood beside him, now on his 4th drink, shooting encouraging nods. Preston smiled at the Halstead Group partners in the 2nd row, gave a measured acknowledgement to his father Gerald in the front left seat, kept the presentation running, because the presentation had always been the engine of everything he had. Then the front doors of the Claiborne estate swung open, not gently, not carefully. They opened wide and stayed open, as if whoever pushed them intended for the sound to carry all the way to the altar. The sound did. Raymond Cole walked in alone. Shoulders squared, charcoal suit absorbing the chandelier light, pocket square catching it, cufflinks throwing it back. He did not look at the rows of guests. He did not look at the flowers, or the champagne tower, or the elaborate table arrangements. He walked straight down the center of the marble lobby, with the measured, unhurried stride of a man who has already decided what is about to happen in this room, and is simply arriving to make it official. The room began to shift the way rooms shift when authority enters a space, and the space reorganizes itself around the new center of gravity. It started at the tables nearest the entrance, rippling outward, table by table, in whispers that moved faster than Raymond was walking. A man in the 3rd row grabbed his wife's wrist. "That's Raymond Cole." She turned. Her eyes went wide. "The CFO of Apex Atlantic Holdings? He was on the Bloomberg 50 last year. And the year before. What is he doing here?" The Halstead Group partners, who recognized Raymond from 3 different industry conferences and a Forbes cover story, exchanged a look that communicated a great deal without requiring words. Several guests near the back were already pulling out their phones. Preston heard the name from across the room before he saw the face. Raymond Cole, his CFO, here at his wedding. The implications arrived in rapid sequence, each one more dazzling than the last. This was not just networking. This was a gift from some alignment of career planets that he had not anticipated and could not have manufactured. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks for the last time, and came down the aisle toward the entrance at a pace that was technically a walk, but felt like a sprint restrained by social obligation. He extended his hand from 10 feet away. "Mr. Cole, sir, what an extraordinary honor. I am Preston Whitfield, VP of Operations, Infrastructure Division. I have followed your leadership for years, and I want you to know that your approach to capital risk allocation in emerging infrastructure markets is genuinely the framework I use in everything I do at the company." His hand hung in the air between them, extended, waiting. Raymond looked at the hand. He looked at it for 1 second, then 2, then 3. The 3 longest seconds in the history of the Claiborne estate. Then he raised one flat palm toward Preston, level and absolute, and final, and said, "I know who you are, Preston." His voice was perfectly calm and not loud at all, because a man who owns a room does not need volume to fill it. "But I am not here for you." Preston's smile did not fade. It ceased to exist as a structure. Raymond turned 90 degrees toward the open front doors and extended his right hand. Marcus Bennett walked in. Same navy suit, same shoes, polished but worn, carrying the honest marks of years of use. The brown paper package pressed against his chest, with both hands, tied with kitchen twine, simple and unashamed, and worth more than anything else in the room. But something about him was different from the man who had walked out those same doors 47 minutes ago. His shoulders were not hunched. His eyes were not down. He came through the doorway and into the lobby with the unhurried certainty of a man who has spent a long, quiet time on a bench beneath old elm trees, remembering exactly who he is and what he built from nothing and what it cost him to build it. He did not need to announce himself. His presence did it for him, because he owned the room. The silence that fell over the Claiborne Estate ballroom was not the polite silence of ceremony or the uncomfortable silence of a social misstep. It was the deep, pressing, physical silence of 300 people simultaneously realizing they have been inside a story they did not understand, and that the story is not the one they thought they were watching. Raymond waited until Marcus stood beside him. Then he turned to face the room, and he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen." He paused. He made deliberate eye contact with the Halstead Group partners, with Gerald Whitfield in the front row, whose composure had already begun to crack around the edges, with Tyler Marsh near the bar, whose bourbon had stopped moving, with Preston at the altar, who had not yet fully processed what was happening, but whose body had already started receiving the information, the color leaving his face like water draining from a glass. For those of you who do not know who this man is. Another pause, longer, letting the room lean into it. This is Marcus Bennett. He let the name sit for a breath. Most of the room did not recognize it yet. Raymond did not hurry them. Founder and chairman of the board of Apex Atlantic Holdings. He let the words land one at a time, like bricks being placed with precision. The man who built the company that signs every paycheck in this room. He turned and looked directly at Preston, and as I understand it, the father of the bride. The room came apart. A fork rang against a plate somewhere near the center of the ballroom and echoed through the silence like a struck bell. Margaret Whitfield's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor and exploded into 100 pieces across the Italian stone. She did not move to collect them. She could not. Her hand remained in the shape of the glass that no longer existed, suspended in the air, fingers curved around nothing. Gerald Whitfield's face moved, through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, composure to horror to calculation, the face of a man who built his entire life on knowing which rooms he was in and has just discovered that he fundamentally misread this one. Tyler Marsh's bourbon stopped moving and stayed stopped, his hand trembling enough that the ice in the glass made a rattling sound. The Halstead Group partners looked at each other and then looked at the floor with the synchronized discipline of men who have long experience at not being visibly present when situations become inconvenient. And Preston did not go pale the way a person goes pale, from cold or from illness. He went the ashen gray-white of a man whose body has received information that his mind is physically refusing to accept, whose blood has been told something that his brain is still in the process of denying. He moved backward from the altar 1 step and then 2 steps, and his heel caught the edge of the aisle runner, and he stumbled, caught himself on the back of a pew. The pew scraped across the marble with a sound that made everyone in the front rows flinch. His mouth was working. No words were coming out, just the hollow shape of words, the air of words, without the substance behind them. Marcus walked forward through the lobby, not fast, not with any sense of urgency or drama. The deliberate pace of a man who does not need to rush because the moment has already arrived, and he has been waiting for it with patience for 47 minutes. He stopped 10 feet from Preston and stood there, the brown paper gift in his arms. He let the room settle around the quiet. Then he said, "I did not come here tonight to make a scene." Quiet voice. Steady. which made it land harder than any shout could have. I came to walk my daughter down the aisle on the most important day of her life. I pressed my suit this morning. I wrapped a gift. I wrote her a letter. I got in a cab, and I rode here, because this is where my daughter needed her father to be. He paused. You looked at me for 10 seconds, and you decided that was not allowed. Preston's mouth was working. I did not ask your name. You did not ask me mine. You looked at a black man in a suit that was not expensive, and you called security. So tell me something, Preston, and I want you to think carefully about your answer. What was that actually about? Because I have a feeling that if my skin looked like yours, you would have shaken my hand and offered me champagne. The words hung in the marble lobby, and every single person in the room heard them and knew they were true and could not answer them. Preston found his voice. It came out broken, scraping through a throat that had gone completely dry. Mr. Bennett, I swear to you, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, I would never have. This is a terrible misunderstanding. I would have treated you completely differently if I had just known. Stop. Marcus raised one hand. Barely. Just enough. Preston stopped. You just told me everything about yourself in one sentence. You are telling me the only reason you would have treated me differently is if you had known I was wealthy. You are telling me that basic human decency is something a man has to earn in your world. That a man in a worn suit does not deserve it. That a man who arrives in a yellow cab does not deserve it. That a black man who does not look the way you think wealth looks does not deserve it. He stepped one step closer. That is not a misunderstanding, Preston. That is exactly who you are. And it is exactly who you showed my daughter you were tonight, in front of every person she loves. Preston's knees hit the marble floor, and nobody saw it coming. Not a controlled descent. Not a theatrical gesture. His legs simply gave out, and he went down, both knees cracking against the Italian marble, with a sound that carried through the entire ballroom. He was on his hands and knees on the floor of the venue he had spent $400,000 curating, and 300 guests were watching him, and the chandelier light was catching the tears on his face, and there was nowhere to go, and nothing left to present. Please, he said. Nia, please. I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. I will apologize to your father. I will do anything. Please do not do this. Nia had come through the side corridor while Marcus was speaking, Danielle a step behind her, both still in their wedding attire, and Nia stood looking at the man on the marble floor with an expression that was not hatred, something quieter and more conclusive than hatred. I gave you every opportunity to love my family for who they are, she said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have cost everything available to hold them still. Not for what they have, not for what they look like, not for whether they arrive in the right car. I wanted to know if you were capable of seeing a person clearly. Tonight I found out the answer. She reached to her left hand. The 3-carat diamond. She set it on the nearest table, gently, without drama, a simple act of finality. We are done. She went to her father, took his arm, and they walked out together, through the same doors that security had used to remove him 47 minutes earlier. Ivory silk and navy wool. Father and daughter. Out through the marble lobby, and through the heavy oak doors, and into the long golden light of a Connecticut summer evening. Nobody stopped them. Nobody spoke. 300 people, who had spent the evening carefully managing their own appearances, stood in perfect silence and watched a father and his daughter walk away. What followed over the next 72 hours moved the way these things move in the age of the internet, which is to say very fast and without mercy for the unprepared. Danielle Brooks had been recording Tyler Marsh from the moment he first opened his mouth to her near the appetizer table. She had kept the recording going for 19 minutes, capturing everything. His "knowing your place" comment. His "some people just do not have the breeding for events at this level" comment. His gesture toward the front door. All of it, clean and clear. She posted the video at 11 that night without a caption. By 6 in the morning it had crossed 1.4 million views. By the following evening it was at 7 million. Tyler Marsh was identified and located by the internet within 90 minutes of posting. His firm issued a public statement the following morning, and he was gone from the company by noon. The Hartford Courant ran the full story 2 days later, sourced from at least 4 guests who had decided overnight that silence was more uncomfortable than disclosure. The headline was read by 3.5 million people in 24 hours. Within 4 days, every major national outlet had reported it. Preston Whitfield's name, face, and professional history were publicly available to anyone with a search engine. Someone located his college social media presence, which included a photograph from a fraternity event in 2009 featuring a Confederate flag as a party decoration, and a public tweet from 2012 describing a diversity hiring initiative as corporate charity for people who couldn't make the bar on their own. The portrait that assembled itself from these pieces was not of a man who had made one poor decision under pressure. It was of a man who had been building toward this moment his entire life, one dismissal at a time, in rooms where no one had yet been powerful enough or positioned enough to make it cost him anything. Inside Apex Atlantic Holdings, the board convened an emergency session that Monday morning. Marcus sat at the head of the table for the first time in 3 years. He did not say much. He did not need to. Raymond presented the findings in full. Deshaun Williams filed his federal discrimination lawsuit on a Wednesday, and Apex Atlantic settled it on the following Friday, without contest, for an amount Deshaun's attorney described publicly as life-changing and appropriate. The company restructured its internal ethics reporting process, installed an independent ombudsman, and established what became known as the Bennett Standard, a binding requirement that any discrimination complaint at any level be reviewed by an independent body within 30 days, without appeal to departmental loyalty or personal relationships. The financial fraud investigation was referred to federal regulators. Preston's stock options were voided under the morality clause in Section 12 of his employment contract. His credentials were collected by security Monday morning. Gerald Whitfield called every contact he had. None of them could reach anything. That mattered because Apex Atlantic's legal team was not playing defense. It was playing offense, and the chairman of the board had personally authorized every move. Preston Whitfield sold his Manhattan condo 8 months after the wedding. That never happened. Filed for bankruptcy 4 months. After that, when the legal settlement costs consumed what remained of his savings. Moved to Columbus, a city where his name did not immediately produce a search result. That ended a conversation. No public apology. No statement. Not one word directed toward Marcus, or Nia, or Deshaun Williams, or any of the people his behavior had cost years of opportunity and respect. Until the night, 10 months after the Claiborne estate, when everything finally broke open inside him in a quiet kitchen in Columbus, with nobody watching. He was eating takeout at a kitchen table by himself when his phone showed him a notification. Someone had sent him a link to a long-form piece about Marcus Bennett in a business publication covering the launch of the Bennett Foundation Fellowship and its first graduating class of Ments. He almost did not click it. He clicked it anyway. He read for 40 minutes. He read about Marcus waking up at 4:58. About pressing the suit twice, once the night before and once the morning of, because it mattered to get it right. About the brown paper package with the pocket watch and the handwritten letter on lined paper from a legal pad. About the warehouse on the south side of Chicago and the first truck and the 3 years of sleeping in the cab and the gas station sandwiches and the legal pad calculations at highway rest stops. About a man who had built something extraordinary out of the conviction that people were worth treating with basic human decency, and who had chosen to live on Calumet Avenue and drive a 10-year-old sedan not because he had to, but because he understood that the truest version of who you are is the one you are when there is nothing to present and nobody important watching. He read the quote from the letter, the one Nia had shared in her interview, the one that had been shared 11 million times and printed on clothing and read at commencement ceremonies and tattooed on forearms. The measure of a man is not the suit he wears, but the way he treats someone he believes can do nothing for him. Preston put his phone on the table. He sat in his kitchen for a long time, and for the first time in 10 months of losing things and blaming other people for the losing of them, in the quiet of a kitchen in Columbus, with no audience and no resume to protect and no image left to manage, he understood what he had actually done. He had stood in the lobby of a building that Marcus Bennett's 30 years of labor had made possible and decided in 10 seconds, on the basis of a suit and a cab and a skin color, that Marcus Bennett did not belong in a room Marcus Bennett owned. He had not paused. He had not asked a question. He had performed contempt in front of 300 people, as if contempt were a form of taste, as if dismissing a human being publicly made him larger rather than smaller. He had told himself his whole life that his judgments about people were based on quality, on merit, on standards. He understood now, sitting alone in a kitchen at midnight in a city where nobody knew his name, that what he had called standards was prejudice in a tuxedo. What he had called taste was fear in a blazer. He had spent his entire life measuring other people by rules he had written to exclude them, and he had called it excellence. He found a piece of paper and a pen. He did not type it. Something about the gravity of what he needed to say required the slowness and the commitment of handwriting. He wrote to Marcus Bennett for 2 hours. He did not ask for forgiveness, or for his job back, or for the consequences to reverse themselves. He wrote because Deshaun Williams had deserved a fair shot at a career he had earned, and had been denied it repeatedly and systematically, and that was true regardless of whether anyone ever read this letter or believed it was sincere. He wrote because Marcus Bennett had built something real out of the belief that people were worth treating with respect, and Preston had spent 3 years working inside that company without once asking what it was built on or who had built it. He sealed the letter and mailed it the next morning to Apex Atlantic Holdings, attention Marcus Bennett, and he did not wait at his mailbox for a response. He went to work. He came home. He sat with the weight of what he had done, and he kept sitting with it because that was the only honest thing left available to him. This is the lesson that lives inside the story of Marcus Bennett and the Claiborne estate and the navy suit and the brown paper package tied with kitchen twine. The truth about who a person is does not live in the things they own, or the way they arrive at a venue, or the number on a price tag, or the color of their skin. The truth about who a person is lives in what they do when they believe no one who matters is watching. Preston Whitfield believed no one who mattered was watching when he crossed a marble lobby and stopped 2 feet from a man in a worn suit. He was wrong about almost everything a man can be wrong about in a single moment, and the cost of that wrongness was not, in the end, the salary or the corner office or the stock options or the condo or the reputation or the social circle or any of the scaffolding of a life built on the diminishment of others. The cost was simpler and more human and heavier than all of those things combined. It was the recognition, in a quiet kitchen in Columbus at midnight, that there had been a good man standing in front of him, a man who had built something extraordinary out of nothing, a man who had chosen decency over display every single day for 30 years, a man who had pressed his suit twice and wrapped a pocket watch in brown paper and written 4 pages of love on a legal pad, and Preston had called security. He had looked at that man and seen nothing worth knowing. And the only person made smaller by that blindness in every room and in every year that followed was Preston himself. Marcus Bennett went home to his apartment on Calumet Avenue. Same 2 bedrooms. Same leaky faucet that he finally fixed in August. Same diner on 43rd Street, where the waitress calls him by his first name and does not know, and does not need to know what any business publication says he is worth. He irons his suits on Sunday mornings. He drives the same sedan. He has dinner with Nia every Thursday at the same booth. Some weeks they talk for hours. Some weeks they just sit together in comfortable quiet, and that is enough. He speaks at universities and business schools now, Harvard and Howard and Wharton and schools in between, always the same 4 words as his title. The suit does not matter. He tells the same story every time, and every time the room goes silent in the same place, and every time someone in the audience cries, and every time Marcus Bennett lets that silence sit for a moment before he continues, because some silences are worth sitting in, because some things take time to land properly, because the most important lessons are the ones that cost something to learn, and that is exactly how you know they are true.
Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. We're preparing for you.